Excited about having Sareena Hopkins join me? You bet I am. In fact, I'm super excited. Sareena Hopkins is an outstanding leader, dynamic speaker, and diplomatic team builder. As Executive Director of the Canadian Career Development Foundation, CCDF, Sareena works in Canada and internationally to strengthen the reach and impact of career development. With her team at CCDF, she moves from ideas to action in areas of public policy, research and development, capacity building, and advocacy. Join us to learn more about the latest in careers.
Super thrilled to have Sareena Hopkins join me today. She is my role model whenever I think of research in career development field. So thank you so much, Sareena, for being here. And I promise not to waste too much of your time and dig right away into the first question I have for you. And as you know, part of the show for me is finding and defining different career terms within the career, what I like to call career literacy. Everybody can call it career knowledge, but to me, it is career literacy. As executive director of the Canadian Career Development Foundation, the CCDF, you chose the term career development professionals, or CDPs. I'm curious and ready to hear your definition.
Thanks, Hoda, and I'm super excited to be here with you today. So yes, I did choose the term career development professional, and I'm just going to back up one little teeny tiny bit to include career development because they are so closely related. Language is such a challenge in our field, both within our field. Those of us working in the career development sector often use all kinds of different terms to describe ourselves and the work we do, which creates a real problem for those looking at our sector, trying to find us and trying to understand what we do when we don't have common terminology. It really is a challenge for those looking for us from the outside as well. So quite some time ago, we tried to take a cut at really defining career development as the lifelong process of managing learning, work, and transitions in order to move toward your preferred future. And learning includes both informal and formal learning. Work includes both paid and unpaid. And in today's labor market, those transitions in and across and between learning and work are so critical and are increasing in most people's lives. And so that makes the role of career development so important. So as part of a 3-year initiative that we've been involved in, reimagining the competency framework for practice in our field and testing a national approach to certification, we did work collaboratively with all kinds of folks across the country who work in the career sector to also try to define career development professional, which would be the title granted upon successful certification. And so that definition of career development, the reason I wanted to bring it in is that it's reflected in that title. So a career development professional helps people to navigate learning and work and the transitions in and across learning and work across the lifespan. And the part of the definition that I really love is that it's a pretty long definition, so I won't read the whole thing, but the part that I really love is that it talks about the vital role that career development professionals play within the broader human service ecosystem and how career development services really directly have an impact on promoting health, promoting social and economic outcomes, not only for individuals, but also for communities and for institutions. And so really looking at that broader impact of quality career and employment services delivered by a career development professional. So that's my definition for the day.
I loved it. I love it, and you included a lot of the ideas that I like. It is a lifelong process. That one for me is that it's not like you find the next job and then you're done. It's
exactly.
a continuous process.
And it is a process of managing. It in so many instances, career development unfortunately is something that kind of happens to people. Sometimes without them even knowing that it's happening. We kind of fall into learning and work in our lives. But there's a real art to managing that well and actually building, creating, being the architect of your own future.
Absolutely. And yes, art is good too. I like that. I haven't heard that one used before with when we talk about the career development field, but it's the art of creating your career, I guess.
Yeah.
So I love that. And you talked about two things. So we'll dig into the first one. For the benefit of our audience who may not be familiar with the new competency framework for career development professionals in Canada, can you tell us a little bit more about it? I mean, share as much as you want, but how it was developed and how you hope it will be used.
Absolutely. So excited to tell you about it, both to say how it was developed, because I think that that's really important, and also to talk a little bit about the end product, which I hope the field really feels proud of. So 3 years ago, we did receive support from ESDC to embark in a 3-year initiative to build with and by the field a newly reimagined competency framework, and to use that as an underpinning for an approach to national certification. So let me talk about the competency framework first, and then I'll say a little bit about the certification approach. So Canada was the first country in the world to ever articulate a competency framework for the career development sector. Back well over 20 years ago, the Canadian Standards and Guidelines for Career Development Practitioners was created. And what made it special from my perspective was that it was built with and by the field. So it wasn't folks outside of the field sort of looking in and deciding what competencies really should underpin quality, but those that really are on the front lines delivering services and those receiving services that really had the voice. And there was a huge emphasis both 20 plus years ago and this time around to really try to bring voices from different parts of the country, from different identity groups, from really trying to reflect the whole constellation of ways that services are delivered and the whole constellation of groups that services are delivered to. And so the competency framework, well, I guess the other thing that is really unique this time around is we worked with an occupational standards expert. So again, rather than having the occupational standards experts define it, we were in, our field was doing the defining, but we had this rigor at the side saying you have to do this in a way that's aligned with ISO standards, that really sets the bar high, that you can hold our competency framework against a competency framework from any other sector across the entire labor market. We really wanted to sort of raise the bar in that way. And so whereas the original standards and guidelines, they were a breakthrough at the time, but we've gone much, much deeper this time around. So there are 100 competencies in the framework, broken into 4 broad categories. The first is professional practice, and it's kind of the foundational competencies that underpin quality in frankly any human service. So these are competencies that we in the career development sector would share with other human service providers, whether they are counselors or social workers or others that are working in that kind of person-facing service delivery. And so they are things like adhering to a code of ethics. We have a brand new code of ethics that we developed with fantastic leadership and generosity from the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association, building on the shoulders of those giants to create a code of ethics that is really unique to our field in career development. In that first broad category, you would find, the micro skills that are required to build a strong working alliance with trust and respect, and the kind of micro skills that you need to do a strong employability assessment and to build a relationship that supports good service. Obviously, competencies around working with diversity and inclusion. Again, you would want that across any kind of human service. So there are 9 competency groupings in that first category. Each one of those groupings would have anywhere from 2 to 7 or 8 competencies. The second broad category are competencies that are specific to career development professionals, but are generic across career development professionals. So we're trying to say, no matter where you practice and with whom, if you are a career development professional, what are the competencies that really are essential? And so again, there are, you would see competencies around having a foundation in career development theory, for example, understanding the service delivery process. There are, 6 competencies under that category. Awareness of diverse worldviews, specific interventions around different elements of career services. The third category are more specialized competencies that some career development professionals may need, others may not, depending on the setting that they're working in and the specific role that they play. So an example of that is working with assessment tools, for example. And then the final category, and this is one that we're really excited about, are sort of leadership and outreach competencies. So as we think about building our field and building future leaders, what are the competencies that are needed there around advocacy, around policy, around research? And so each of the competencies is a bit of a mountain to build. So each competency, I'll just give you a sense, sets the stage initially with purpose and context. So why is this competency important? There are very specific performance indicators. So what does it look like when it's being done well? There are very specific knowledge indicators. So what does somebody need to know in order to perform this competency well? We talk about contextual variables. So are there any context-specific variables that can affect the performance of the competency? Any key terms that need to be understood? And then there's a whole series of rating scales tied to each of the 100 competencies, including what is its criticality, what's the frequency of use in most settings, what's the level of difficulty relative to the other competencies, what is the time required to gain proficiency? Can you be proficient by taking a course that's 3 days long, or does it require actually a few years of experience before you become proficient in it? What's the interdependency? Is this competency linked to other competencies that you only really can build mastery by building mastery across all of them? What's the likelihood of automation? To what extent do you deliver this competency typically alone, or is it with other colleagues? And then finally, whether there are any specific, work aids or tools or other equipment that are connected. So you get a sense of the really very, very detailed descriptions for each competency, which we want it for several fronts. One, because we really are hoping that the framework will be used in a whole variety of ways by training providers. And so the more detail you can provide on that front, the easier their job is in terms of integrating that competency into their training programs. For employers, as they think about job descriptions, as they think about hiring and for the professional development of their staff, the more detailed competency descriptions help there. And then of course that leads to certification. And so we have had a scenario where 5 provinces have had certification, voluntary certification: BC, Alberta, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. But all of the professional associations right across the country have been involved. Long before this project started, we've had a certification working group that started probably about 15 years ago now. And we've all been sort of moving toward that collective desire to have something that is both rigorous and consistent across the country, to allow for mobility and to really have a common standard that guides our practice. And so again, we have developed an approach to national certification that includes 2 forms of assessment. One is an exam that is based on these competencies. And I could talk for a very long time about the development of those items. They have been written by subject matter experts in our field. They have been reviewed by their peers who are also subject matter experts in this field. We had a pilot test of the exam itself, and then we've been going through, we've had groups of other subject matter experts meeting intensively. We're in the midst of that right now, looking at every single item, looking at the psychometric data associated with every item, and doing final validation of those items. And so there's a lot of checks and balances along the way to really get those items right. And then the second form of assessment is a performance assessment that takes the form of a structured interview. So there would be trained interviewers that would interview the candidates. So at the end of this project, we have now the competency framework. We are just on the brink of being ready to release it. The last pieces are the translations. So we want to be able to release in English and French simultaneously. So as the minute we have both language versions, we will be making that widely available. The national certification by the end of August will have been completely developed, tested, refined, and basically ready to go, just pending. We have a request for some resources to move us to implementation, because there are of course additional steps that need to get into place in order to implement, such as having a representative governing body in place, and some of the governance policies that will ensure that it is sustainable in the long term. So that was a mouthful.
I appreciate you taking the time to summarize it. I understand, and I probably had it's a very long process, but also the framework itself is loaded with information, and we probably could talk about it for hours. But thank you for summarizing it so nicely, but really pointing out the important details in it. I really appreciate that, and it is an exciting time, I think, to be working in the career development field in Canada with all this progress that's happening. And the certification program, I am looking forward to it, and I am going to sit for it. I am certified, but it would be nice to experience it myself as well as we talk about it, and then get to know more about the new expectations, I guess, that, like you said, raising the bar within the field. And that's probably one of the things that I think the certification program will do, is raising that bar. But what other changes do you hope, or do you think the program will bring once we're all certified under one national program?
Yeah, well, my hope is, I think I have several answers to that question.
Hey, go at it.
One thing I hope is that it will make us more visible. When you have 5 different certifications, and then provinces where there is no certification, and not complete clarity around the competencies that underpin practice, and not consistency across the country around whether that actually is taken seriously. It doesn't serve those that we serve well, but it also doesn't serve us well as a sector. I think that having a national certification really brings a level of rigor and consistency and visibility that I hope will shine a spotlight on the power of career development, on the contribution, the huge contribution that it makes in the lives of the individuals that we serve, in the lives of their families and communities, and in organizations, and for employers as well. The better we do, the better our labor market and educational systems work. And so, but I don't think that is really visible to most people. And so part of my hope is that having this new framework and a national certification associated with it, is that it will make that much more visible. I also hope for within our field that it brings a confirmation of the pride that people should feel. The work that we do is highly complex. It is not, it sometimes gets thrown into the realm of almost administrative work, and it is so beyond that. Quality career services really calls on sophisticated competencies, and it is complex work, and it really matters in terms of outcomes. Some of the research that we've been doing around the impact of quality career services, not just around employability outcomes, but also around, you know, mental health and well-being outcomes. The work we do really matters. And so I also hope that it really serves as an affirmation that those who are working in this field and really devoted to quality service should feel extremely proud of the work they do. So the certification, we're targeting it for folks who have been in the field for a minimum of 3 years. So it's not intended for new entrants. You know, there are a growing number of great training programs for new entrants, and I really encourage anyone who's thinking about entering the field to take that training seriously, because I can say that the assessment elements of the national certification are intended to recognize the competencies that experienced, you know, somebody who's been in the field for a few years and has taken, who takes career development seriously and has invested in their own training and education on that front, whether it's formal or informal. Yeah, so I hope that it makes us more visible from the outside, and I hope that it makes us more proud from the inside.
That's great aspirations. And yes, we do wear many hats as career professionals, not just one, and serve our clients from different angles. So yes, let's hope I'm looking forward to it, that's for sure. Sareena, every time I watch one of your sessions, I learn something new. And during our last session chat together, you taught me about the CMEC framework, reference framework for successful student transitions. And in my effort to push for having career literacy part of the curriculum within the education systems, I was surprised but happy to know that it exists, and that it introduced 2 tools that I think can be used: the student transition benchmark self-assessment tool and the student transition action plan template. How can we as career professionals or career counselors, I guess, spread the word about these tools and get, you know, people engaged in using them?
Oh, it's such a good question. You know, Canada is, we are really good at developing tools and resources that are, you know, internationally recognized as being some of the strongest in the world. But do you think that we can get them used in Canada?
I've seen you being interviewed internationally about them, and so it's like, we have to talk about them.
It's a challenge. I don't know whether it's the size of our country or the political structure. You know, an organization like CMEC brings together the ministers of education from across Canada, but you know, education is a provincial territorial responsibility, and so I think sadly, whether again it's the size of our country or the way that our system is configured, but often implementation is where we fall down. We do great research, we do great development, but we don't always actually implement what we learn from the research and implement the tools that come out of our development work. So and the reference framework for successful student transitions is a really good example of that. You know, a lot of research went into developing those benchmarks, both, you know, literature research, doing an international scan of best practice, but also really deep consultation with every province and territory to really bring forward the best recommendations of what needs to be in place for students to be able to successfully transition from school to work. From a career education point of view. And so they are specific, they are comprehensive. And as you mentioned, there is a self-assessment tool. So whether you are in a school or whether you are a provincial minister, you can actually do an assessment of where your particular jurisdiction is vis-a-vis the benchmarks, and then a simple action planning tool that can help you to fill the gaps. And you know, New Brunswick is a really great example of a province that has taken those benchmarks to heart and are really implementing them. But it's so haphazard, it's the people that were involved as they were being developed, were super excited about implementing them, but then, people move jobs and move portfolios, and unfortunately, really good tools like that get lost. So how to spread the word? I would say, if you can contact your local member of parliament and let them know that it exists, and ask how it's being used within your own provincial or territorial Department of Education. It's all the tools, the framework itself, the assessment tool, and the action plan are all accessible on the CMEC website. And we can certainly, I can share a link for anybody who is looking. So assess whether it's something that you think would be useful, and then I would say ask questions. Ask those that are in decision-making roles in your province and territory how it's being used.
I hope by talking about it, we can get people to learn more about it and then start asking those questions. So thanks for detailing that. I do have one more question for you. We digged in a lot of topics and probably could dig in each one of them a long time, but one more topic just to spread the word about it and see what we can do, I guess, together, is the employability dimensions. And for those not familiar with them, there are 4 of them: career exploration, skills enhancement, job search, and job maintenance. To me, again, working with young adults, I like to pass these skills on to them as lifelong skills. We talked about lifelong at the beginning. It's not something that you would use once and move on. And again, I hope to see them incorporated into the education system within the curriculum somehow. Am I correct in my assumption that they're really important and they're really lifelong? And also, my other question is, what can we do to encourage stakeholders to take these dimensions and include them in the curriculum?
Yeah, oh, great questions. And what I personally love about the employability dimensions is they do serve to really kind of frame our scope of practice in a fulsome way. Sometimes when people look at our sector from the outside, they sort of assume that really what we're about is getting people jobs, like maybe helping people with resumes and get people jobs. And of course, the scope of what we do is more complex and more fulsome than that. And so the employability dimensions actually span 6 dimensions if you take them all into account. So at one end of the spectrum are sort of pre-employability or readiness dimension. Are there unresolved barriers, whether they happen to be systemic barriers, such as, a lack of safe housing or a lack of transportation or dependent care, or they may be more intrapersonal or interpersonal issues, such as a lack of hope for the future, or not really believing in the capacity to succeed anymore, and therefore not feeling motivation to try, not having any kind of support network in your life. So there are some factors at that almost readiness stage, and they so often get missed. We know that they are very prevalent, and yet they don't, they are addressed as part of the career development scope, but we don't often get credit for addressing them. So it is part of the career scope. Then, of course, that career exploration, people are ready, but they really don't know what they want to do. They're in that exploratory mode, and there's all kinds of work we do helping them to explore both inward and outward in the labor market. You mentioned skills enhancement, work search. Those are sort of the elements that we often associate with career development. But there's also maintenance, people who successfully get jobs all the time, but have a dickens of the time keeping them. And there's a whole set of skills and strategies around that. And then the 6th dimension is growth, career growth. Like, how do we help people who are happily employed to continue to build that preferred future? We don't stay the same. We change as people as we get older and as we have experiences. So how do we keep our future vision evolving to reflect how we are evolving as people, and how our circumstances are evolving? When you start a family, that might change your perspective of what your preferred future is going to look like. And so when you think about those 6 dimensions, really provide a lovely frame for our scope of practice and define really nicely kind of like what's in and what's out when it comes to delivering career services. I think where the work that we've been doing recently with the dimensions is trying to scratch the surface of them, because I think as a framework, it's useful. It does give a broad definition, but where it has been lacking for me is getting a little bit more granular around what's actually under each of those dimensions. So if you think of it from a perspective of the change that happens in an individual as they succeed in working through career services, like when somebody comes with job readiness issues, if you were to succeed in that dimension, what does that look like? What are the kinds of changes that occur for somebody to say that they're working through job readiness issues? Likewise, career exploration. What are the indicators that will tell us that somebody is getting clearer and getting closer to career clarity? And you could do that for all the dimensions. And so a lot of our work has been articulating the specific indicators that you would associate with each of those dimensions, which translate, if you wish, into metrics that could be used to evaluate career services. Much more meaningful metrics than just, does somebody get employed or in training? So that's how we've been working with the employability dimensions lately.
Well, lots of room for research right there. And yes, you bookended it nicely with the 2 terms that you've added that I think I will add too. But yeah, because we do it anyway. Like we are, assessing for all of that as we're working with every client, for me, like on an individual basis. So, but definitely lots of opportunity for research. I see what, just to define every element is, here we're talking about defining career terms. I mean, this is more to dig deeper into it even. So thank you so much for sharing all of that, Sareena. And these are all the questions I had for you today. But I usually like to wrap up by saying, was there anything you wanted to talk about, but I didn't give you the chance to, or something that you would like to add?
I think I would say on the side of those indicators under the dimensions, I also think that having those puts us in a position as a sector to start telling our own story of impact. So rather than reporting whether somebody gets employed or in training and ending it at that, because that's what most funders typically want, I think that there's an opportunity for us to actually tell a much richer and more compelling story about our impact across the whole range of 6 dimensions, and to be able to speak about our impact on mental health and well-being, to be able to speak about our impact in the transformation that people go through as they're receiving services that actually is moving them much closer to strong and sustainable labor market attachment. So I would really encourage people to think about taking charge of our own data story, because I think it both will inform our practice in a more meaningful way, but it also has the potential to inform policy to move towards a much better functioning ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Sareena, for this advice. I will take it to heart, and hopefully everyone else listening will do as well. Thanks a lot, Sareena.
It's a pleasure. And I've got ideas and tools out there. So if you are interested, happy to chat more with you about it.
Were you able to tell that Sareena Hopkins is my role model in the career development field? I hope you enjoyed listening to and learning from Sareena's wealth of knowledge and experience. You can learn more about Sareena on the CCDF website, ccdf.ca, or connect with her on LinkedIn or follow her on Twitter. And until next time, keep moving in productive directions.